Welcome to BU Project Real Talk with Sarah Jane. We are so excited to have you join us today. I'm Sarah Jane, and here at BU Project Real Talk, we discuss a range of topics from starting your business to building resilience to leadership, just to name a few. And we do this with the purpose of inspiring and empowering women to live their lives with purpose and impact. Today, we are going to unpack all things career-wise, and I'm super excited about this. And to help me do just that, I have my very dear friend, Shelley Johnson, joining us on the show. So just a little bit about Shelley. Shelley is a HR consultant. Her mission is to help businesses build epic, high-performing teams. And over the past decade, she has led HR teams and helped executives and business owners navigate that wild ride that is leadership. She co-hosts a podcast, My Millennial Career, and a finalist in the Australian Podcast Awards. My Millennial Career helps thousands of people to build a career they love. Welcome to the show, Shelley.
Thanks so much for having me, Sarah. It's so beautiful to be with you and with your listeners today.
And so, Shell, just to give us a little bit of background, can you just give us a snapshot of your HR experience and the career at the Millennial Career podcast that you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'd say, have ended up in HR. I kind of fell into it, actually. So I've been doing it for, over a decade. Feels like a long time now. And there's two reasons why I really love the work that I do. The first is helping organizations achieve their mission. So how can we do that? And the way that I help organizations do that is really by building bold leaders and epic teams. That's really part of my mission, my why. And so I've done that in various organizations and industries, and then now through consulting. And the other second reason why I love it, Sarah, and you've probably heard me say this because we've had absolute joy of working together. And one of the things that I love to say is that people are weird, and it's the weirdness. It's the weirdness of people that it's like this beautiful thing of, I don't know, when my daughter, she was really little, we had this beautiful artwork that was Stay Weird. And I've always loved this concept of the weird and wonderful things that happen in the workplace. And I love being in that zone, seeing it. You just can't make it up. It's fun. It's wild. Yeah. And so that's partly why I love HR and love what I do.
I love that, Shell, and I can relate to that on so many levels, because sometimes I look at myself and I go, oh my gosh, I am such a weird person. Does anyone else think the way that I do? And so I can resonate with that so much.
It's so true. And I guess it's kind of why we like reality TV shows, right? Because yes. I know not everyone does, but I've always loved reality TV because I'm like, what makes people do this stuff? Like, what possesses them to do this? Or how do they think? Or how do they act? And I love trying to understand it and, psychoanalyze stuff, even though I'm totally not a psychologist or qualified in any way to do that. But that's part of, when you work in the world of people and you really are interested in human behavior, HR is such a great avenue to follow and a great path. And I guess it's similar in, I suppose, what you're doing in the life coaching space. And yeah, it's just a really amazing place to be. And I find it so energizing, and it's also hilarious and fun.
I love that so much. Although I do like watching reality TV shows, but sometimes I can't watch it because it's really cringy. And so,
yes.
It's
the awkwardness, awkwardness of it.
Love it. That's so good. So today I'd love to dig into your experience and what you've observed, particularly as we're still at the start of the year. It's only February, and I wonder if there's a lot of women out there who may be kind of reflecting on what they want to be doing with their lives and where they want to be with their career. And maybe some are even thinking it's time for a change, or they're ready to resign from their jobs. What advice would you give to those women?
Yeah, it's a really important question to think through. So when you get to the stage of, is it time for me to consider a change, a career change, a job change, whatever that looks like, I often see people in their career jump to job hunting as the first thing. So they just go straight on to Seek or LinkedIn or wherever they go and start thinking what jobs are out there. And I think that's a premature step.
Mm.
What I love is when people go back and take a step back from there and really think about the macro strategic view, which is to start with your values. So what are the things, what are the non-negotiables for me in my career? Not what job do I want, because to me that's downstream, but what do I care about as a person, both personally and professionally? And therefore, how do I allow those values to really guide the career trajectory for me? And I have done a lot of deep work for myself, but also working with clients around how do you understand what matters to you? How do you understand your values personally and when it comes to your career? And then looking at those in relationship to a couple of things. So we look at that in relationship to your strengths. So we've got your values over here. You might have, 2 to 4 values. You have your strengths. And if you haven't done the Gallup Strengths Finder, I'd encourage you to do that. And then you look at those 2 things. And then the third piece of that puzzle is then where do you get your energy from? Mm-hmm. So we have our values, we have our strengths, and we have our energy. And those 3 dynamics, if you think about that, the relationship between the 3 really helps to focus. Where do you want to go? What do you want your career to look like? So rather than jumping to the job hunting, I use that to guide me towards, okay, well, what are the types of jobs that actually relate to and connect to those 3 things? And if you could see me, I've got my hands going everywhere because I'm very expressive. But it's just a really important first step.
Yeah, that's great advice, particularly around the values piece, because that's something that I've been reflecting on myself. I think we're talking about that a lot more than we used to. What are your values? And that's a great way to stop you from even going to a job that you might not even be happy in because it doesn't line up with your values. So that's can
I ask you a question, Sarah? Have you thought, what would you say your values are?
So I've got to remember what I wrote down, but my value is freedom. So I like the idea of having flexibility. It's empathy. So it's a mix of empathy and making a difference. So, which is why I think I'm a life coach. My other one is faith. That's a big one for me. And now I'm struggling to remember the other 2, but they're the top 3 ones.
Yeah, awesome. And it's really interesting, isn't it? Where it takes a bit of time to figure that out. And sometimes you need to be in a job or a career that you don't like, because it's when you're under pressure that you start to really realize, these are my values. These are the things that are important to me. Yeah. And I think even if right now if any of your listeners are in a tough spot with their career, this is a beautiful moment to really stop and go, what are those things that are under pressure? What are the things that are frustrating me? What are the pain points? Because that's usually related or connected to your values.
Yeah, I love that. And I just would encourage that anyone watching or listening today, take the opportunity now to do that. Take the time to go, okay, what are my values? Take as long as you need, if you need a day or if you need a couple of weeks to kind of mull over that, and then kind of start to think through, what are my strengths, and then go from there. Because when you have your values in place, you actually start to make decisions differently as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I love that, Shell. So take me through the journey. So say someone has done that background, done their homework, worked out what their values are, and they've decided, I am ready to start something new. I want to talk about resumes. I want to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of resumes, because we've all been there where we know we've got the skills and experience for the job, but we just can't seem to get to the interview stage. Is it our resume that's letting us down?
Yeah, it's there's so many factors when it comes to recruitment and to making your resume and your application stand out. I don't like to think of resumes as a singular thing. So it's not all on your resume. It's actually your full application. So let's think about that as a full kind of suite of things, Sarah. So we'll have in there your cover letter, we'll have your resume, we'll probably have your LinkedIn profile and presence.
Mm-hmm.
And those things collectively make up your application in my mind. So as a HR person, one of the things that I say, let's start with the ugly. So you said good, bad, and the ugly. We'll talk about the applications that I get that I really just straight away disregard would be if they've sent through a resume without a cover letter. So if I've got 200 applications that I'm reviewing and someone hasn't bothered to write a cover letter, I won't look at it. That might seem harsh. That's just what usually recruiters and HR people, if it's a kind of bigger business and they have a HR team, they're only looking at your application for, initially like maybe 20 seconds. Honestly, that's so quick. You look at it and you go, are you in? Like, are you a fit for the second review or are you not? And so the first thing I'm doing is culling. And if there's not a cover letter, then I will put that person to the no pile. And that's just kind of the process of elimination, right? And it's hard, but it is kind of what it is. If then the next stage, once I've put people into the no or the maybe pile, I'll be looking for a few other things. So I start to look at, well, do they obviously have the basic kind of skills as per the job ad? So if the job ad has got listed certain things, I want to look at that resume and see that person has addressed the key criteria. The other thing I then look for is on that cover letter, is that a tailored cover letter? So if they're doing it for let's say, Sarah's BU project business and people are applying to you and I was helping you with the recruitment, if they just said, to whom it may concern, see attached my application for the role, and it was just a general kind of, I'm a hardworking person, blah, 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 I'd be like, no, you haven't thought about the business. You haven't looked up who the hiring manager is. So instead, what I'd be doing is I'd find out a bit about the business. So BU project, who runs that? Okay, Sarah Van Eden runs that. All right. And what are the values of that business? Okay, well, I'm going to refer to those in my cover letter. And so you're starting to tailor it. You're putting in much more effort. And straight away, the recruiter, the HR person, the hiring manager goes, this person's done their homework. This person's interested. And so the further you can go with that, the more your application will stand out. The other dynamic, just to finish round this out, is it's working really hard to be succinct. Did I say that right? Succinct, concise. Yes. Let's think of a synonym. So you want to be really concise. So I'd say 1 page for a cover letter is the goal and 2 pages for your resume. And that means that you really need to be intentional with what you include and even more intentional with what you remove from your resume. So keep it streamlined, keep it simple, and make sure that you tailor it to the business that you're applying for.
Okay, awesome tips. Now, Shell, you also mentioned LinkedIn. So
yes.
Is that something we need to consider as we apply for jobs?
Yes, Emily Bowen, who I host the podcast with, she is from a recruitment background. So I work in HR and recruitment is kind of a slightly different field. And she says that if you're not on LinkedIn, you don't exist. And I think, well, is that really true? But as someone who looks at applications all the time, we do get nosy and we want to know a bit more about the person. And LinkedIn's a beautiful way to create a bit of your personal brand, a bit about who you are, your background, and it's more dynamic than a resume. So a resume is quite static, but your LinkedIn presence and profile is a really great way to show an employer a bit more about you personally and professionally. And if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, I'd really encourage you to set one up, and you can go and look at any personalities or kind of people that you've admired their career from afar. Go and have a look on LinkedIn about how they'd set up their profile, and you can pretty much imitate that. And just making sure that you're on there, it's a great way to build your professional network and just connect with people and create a bit of that presence.
Yeah, awesome. That's really helpful. And so, okay, we're on the journey. We've done all of that. We've made it to interview stage. Now, what are the pitfalls of interviews, and what are the things that we should consider doing in our interviews?
Yeah, interviews are tough, aren't they? Because, and I see this so much, interviews are this weird, like artificial environment. And I think one of the things that happens is it's nerve-wracking. So as a candidate, we walk in and we really want the job in most cases, and we're quite nervous. And so that dynamic really plays into how we perform in that. And even the word perform is almost unhelpful, because it kind of perpetuates that sense of this is not a real environment. So one of the things that we do before an interview is really get into that mindset of this is just a conversation. It's just a conversation between me and a couple of other people if it's a panel interview, or me and one other person if it's one-on-one. And so entering it in that way is kind of takes some of the power dynamic out of it. And then to me, that mindset is just, it's so important, because it comes out in the conversation, it becomes really clear, and it helps you to really remove some of the nerves that can derail an interview. There's the mindset piece, Sarah, and then there's the next part of it, which is the practice. And I would encourage anyone to practice for an interview. So it's this amazing thing where a lot of interviews use pretty similar questions. So it has a typical flow. So there's usually a tell me why you've applied for the role. There's a tell us what your strengths are. Tell us what your weaknesses are. Tell us an example of when you've gone above and beyond. There's all these kind of generic questions. So taking the time before an interview to prepare your answers and read them aloud. And I'd even encourage, this might sound really lame, but read them in front of a mirror, just to start to build your confidence with telling your story about your career can be really helpful. And the other really key strategy I have is, instead of showing up and going, oh, I'll just answer them on the fly or on the spot because I won't know some of their questions, I would go back and think through my career and go, what are the biggest wins I've had in my job or in my career? What are the big projects where I've really over delivered and done a great job? And I will kind of use that story and tweak it to whatever question comes up. So I'm really showcasing my best work. I'm telling the person about the opportunities that I've had, or the things that I've done that have been really good. And I'm not leaving it up to chance. So thinking through maybe what are 3 to 5 of the things that you really want to be able to communicate, and telling it in a way that you can kind of adapt it to whatever question. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Yeah, that's great. And I've also heard that you should consider an interview as you interviewing the company as well. So how do you have that mindset too? Like, what kind of, I always remember in interviews, they say, do you have any questions for us? And then I get stuck and I'd be like, I don't know. What are some good questions we should be asking back to them?
This is the most, I think this is the most important part of the interview, because we get to the end, and as the candidate, we've come in and we're so focused on making sure we communicate well that we get to the end and we're like, oh, phew, that's done. I'm relieved. And then they say that question, any questions for us? And our minds worked so hard. And so by that point, we're like crickets, it's like the tumbleweed through our brain. That's like, there's nothing left.
Yeah.
We absolutely need to go into an interview with questions prepared. It's something you can do beforehand. So there's a couple of standard ones. What's the culture like here? Easy. And you ask the leader, so the person who will be your manager, what are you wanting this person to deliver in the first 90 days?
Okay.
And they might list off a few things. What the other things that I'd be asking is, what are the biggest challenges at the moment in this business? what's the strategy for the next 5 years? So there's a few questions you can ask, and they'll make you sound really smart, because people, when you're on the interview panel, you have just asked this person so many questions that you're quite tired from listening. And if you're doing an 8-hour day of interviews, you're pretty exhausted. And so when a candidate asks you a good question and you get a chance to talk, the interview panel are like, yay, we're getting our chance to kind of talk to this person, as opposed to just the drain of listening for so long. And so making sure you walk in and bring your notepad, have the questions written down, and know, like an interviewer, if I came in with my notepad and I've got my questions and I'm holding my notepad up right now, and I say, oh, okay, Sarah, like I'm just going to quickly check my notes. I think you've answered some questions, but I've got a couple more. Do you mind if I just have a little look? I think that shows diligence, dedication, and that you've done that thinking ahead of time. And so as the interviewer, I am automatically like, tick, tick, tick. This person has really done a lot of the thinking before they've got here about the questions that they want to ask.
Yeah, that's so good. And I love that idea of being prepared and doing your homework as well. Such important.
Right. Yeah. If you absolutely need to have done as much research on that business's website as you can, read the annual report if they have them, find out what their cultural values are. Because if I could come to you, Sarah, and I was applying to work for you, and I knew, at BU Project, you say one of your values is freedom and responsibility. What does that look like to you, Sarah? And you're like, oh, this person's done their research, they've done their homework. And it's nice to know that people have really thought about that before they get to the interview.
Yeah, that's so good. Such great tips. And I guess I want to flip the switch a little bit, Shell. And I want to talk about people who may be actually really happy in their job or their organization, but maybe they're starting to feel like they're ready for a challenge. Now, I find it really hard to talk about promotion and pay rise. Honestly, like I'd rather avoid them unless my boss comes to me. So what are some ways that, especially women, that we can start to navigate those really tricky conversations around a promotion and a pay rise? How do we do that?
Before we get there about how we do it, can you tell me why? What is it in you that is hesitant to do that? Because that'll help me look at, well, how would we then address it? What do you think it is in yourself, but also in women in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll speak for myself. So for me, it's almost the fear of rejection a little bit. So it would be if I was to approach my manager and say, hey, I think I'm ready for a promotion. And then they come back to me and go, well, we don't think you're ready, or we don't think you'll be good. I mean, that would just be really devastating. But the other thing too is with pay, I don't know, unless I've done research in the industry, I don't know if what I'm getting paid is the appropriate amount and if it's okay to ask for a pay rise. Like, should I just be thankful that I'm getting paid anyway? So that's kind of my thought process.
Yeah. And we can tell even in hearing, especially the pay side, it becomes a question of value.
Yeah.
Like, am I valued and how much? Because that's where the dollar figures come in, and it can get pretty uncomfortable and personal. The fear of rejection is definitely real. Like, it's such a huge thing, and we often don't want to put ourselves forward. We kind of have this, I suppose, it's not abdication, that's not the right word, but it's my manager would just naturally think of me if an opportunity comes up, and so I'll just leave it in their hands.
Yeah. This
is not based on quantitative research. This is just based on what I've seen in HR, but I don't think males are as hesitant about that. I think they're much more forward about, hey, I'm ready for a promotion. What is the opportunities that I can be pursuing? So I guess going back to your question, what can we do to make that type of conversation easier? I think it's all about how we ask the question. So how do we create a question that reduces some of our fear, and it is open enough, and it creates options for the manager? And one of the things that we should be doing is actually asking for their help, because I can't remember what book it was that I was reading about this in, but the psychology of asking for help, that when someone feels that you want their help, they see you in a more positive light. Have you heard about that?
I actually, have you read Dare to Leave by Brene Brown?
Yes.
Yeah. So she was saying, I'm pretty sure it was her book. She was saying that employers that ask their boss more questions actually is a positive thing for the manager. Like, it actually looks really good as to someone who doesn't ask questions. So I don't know if you found it in that book, but yeah.
Yeah, well, that's right. It's like, so how then we bring this question to our manager becomes really important. It's not about, let's not narrow the scope of it. So if I'm using you as the example, I'm coming to you and I'm getting bored in my role and I want a promotion or I want a new challenge. The way I would frame that up is, Sarah, I love working in this business and it's been such a rewarding experience and I've grown so much already. One of the things I'm mindful of at the moment is that I feel like potentially I'm getting to that mastery stage of this role and I'm thinking, what's next? And so I'd love to open the conversation with you, Sarah, about what are the opportunities here and are they here? Because I know that, I don't want to come across as, putting you into a corner with this, but I just think that if I can forecast down the road, I wouldn't want to opt out prematurely without having this discussion. So are there any opportunities for promotion or maybe leadership roles in the future that you would see me for? And so then you're starting that conversation, you're really opening it up. And then you can get more specific, but it's actually saying, it's not a conversation where you want an answer necessarily. It's the start of multiple conversations. How does that resonate with you?
That's really good, because I think, again, speaking for myself, you often think that you want a resolution straight away, right? You want that solution. Whereas if you open it up to a conversation, then that kind of eliminates your fear a little bit, because it's just a conversation. And then that way, I think maybe your manager will not say no, but then go, okay, let's work out a plan.
Exactly. And you could be thinking through the other angle you can take with it is, I've been looking at my strengths, and my strengths are communication, responsibility, and you list off what your strengths are. I don't feel, and you could start to go, I don't feel that I'm using my communication strength, and I'd love to start to develop and build that up. I think a leadership role or let's say a project management role might be good for that, to really start to develop that skill set. What options would there be for me to start dipping my toe into the water with that? And so it depends that depends how forward you want to be or how gentle you want to be with it. Or you can be quite direct and say, I want to be in a team leader role by this time frame, and can you help me get there? So there's so many different options and avenues, and it's really about knowing the communication style of your manager as well. Like, how would they like to receive this communication?
Yeah, that's really great advice, Shell. And you touched on before about males feeling more confident in approaching this topic. I want to stop there and talk about male versus female. Not that we're versing each other, but I do want to talk about something that that's been in the conversation for a long time now, and that is gender equality in the workplace. And so we know that we're in the 21st century now, and it's not as common, hopefully, that there's such a big difference in pay gap. But I think it's still happening. And so if that is happening, and say there's a female and male, they're both doing the exact same job, but somehow they know that they're getting paid different at different levels, do you think that this is something we should be addressing, or should we just leave it? What do we do?
Well, I had this exact situation come up in my first real job, actually, out of, I don't know, I can't even remember. It would have been early 20s. And I found out the role that I was doing, and there was myself and a beautiful guy that I worked with, and he started probably a year after me, even longer potentially. I can't remember exactly the details of when he started. And so he had quite, at the time, less experience in this. And I found out accidentally that he was getting paid at that time like an additional $4,000 more than me a year. So, 10 plus years ago, that was quite a decent difference when I was in the early part of my career. And he's been in the role a lot less time, not as much experience, and he's getting paid quite a significant jump up from me. And I saw it because he asked me to come and look at something on his computer screen. And I came over, and then his payslip was up. And I don't think, because he had dual screens, I don't think he realized that it was there. And I went, oh my gosh, like bounce my eyes, avert my eyes. But I obviously saw. And so I had this moment. I remember I drove home from work and I just bawled my eyes out the whole drive home, because I was like, it felt like a expression of my value and worth. And pay shouldn't be that, but something in our human nature, I think, ties some of our worth to it, which is, I think, really unhealthy. But it didn't stop me from, crying the whole drive home. But I had this moment and this decision to make of, what do I do with that? Where do I go with it? I've seen it. I probably shouldn't have, but now I've got this horrible feeling that I'm trying to reconcile. And what I actually did from there was, it's in Dare to Lead, actually. Brene Brown, she says this beautiful thing that you can either choose resentment or discomfort. And so her sense is, in any hard conversation, choose discomfort over resentment. And in that moment for me, I had this choice to make. Do I choose to resent my employer and my boss for paying this person who's doing the exact same job as me more money? Or do I choose to have a conversation, and a tough conversation, about the inequity of gender pay? It's already a difficult topic to approach. And it certainly was that a long time ago, where we didn't have the gender reporting standards that we have today. Gender pay reporting standards. And so I booked in a meeting with her, and I sat down and I said, okay, this thing's happened. And I saw my colleagues' pay rate, and I realized that they're getting paid quite a bit more. Can you help me understand that? Because I feel really hurt. And I was quite honest and open with her about how it made me feel. And yeah, it was awkward, as like, I got to say, it was so awkward to go there. But what that did was, it meant that the organization actually had to own the fact that, well, this isn't right. Like, this is not how we've set these pay rates is really not fair. And we need to address it. And the confidentiality around pay is complex, and I think, as in some regard, it's been problematic. But I think that we should feel that we can have these discussions. They're hard, they're awkward, they're uncomfortable, but they're important for us to start voicing as women. This is not okay. Like, it's not okay that I'm doing the exact same role. And I think it's really important, going back to that Brene Brown quote, to choose discomfort over resentment every time. And choose that, because that's where we can start to see the action. Or if your employer says, well, no, we can't do anything about that, or we're not going to do anything, or they don't take it seriously, well, then you might actually start to think, well, this is not an organization that I align with in terms of my values. And so maybe I need to look elsewhere.
Yeah. And that's really great that you could speak from personal experience. Like, it's unfortunate that happened, but amazing that you can then be able to help other women who may be going through the same thing. Like, I don't know if it's still quite an issue like today. I remember at one of the places I worked, it was very evident, this was years ago, very evident that men and women were on different pay rates for the same role. But fast forward 10 or so years, you would hope that that's something that's not an issue like it was back in the day. But if it is, I love that you are encouraging us to talk about it, to actually speak up, because it's not right. It's not right that it's happened, and it's not right that it's happening. So
exactly. Yeah. And it is still a really live issue right now. I think the gender pay gap at the moment, I thought, well, from last year was around 20%. Yeah, 20.1%. I was just looking it up. Okay. So that means, men earn around, on average, 25K more a year than women. Wow. Who are working full time. And now there's so many factors that go into that report. And it is quite contentious, actually. We interviewed on our podcast Mary Wooldridge, who is the CEO and director of the Gender Equality Agency. And I'd really encourage anyone to go and listen to that episode, because she unpacks this issue of what really is at the heart of it. And we come back to this sense of there is some underlying bias that exists in the recruitment process, and there's certain things like the motherhood penalty, which is a whole nother, episode in and of itself. But it's just being able to, I think, go there and have the conversation. Sometimes stepping into the awkwardness, because that's what's going to bring about the change.
Yeah, so good, Shell. And I'd love for you to, what we'll do as well is we'll put a link to your podcast, because I'd love for people, especially women, if they want to go and listen to that conversation, they can. So we'll do that. We'll link your podcast so that they can do that. But
beautiful.
I have another question around burnout in the workplace. So what I was thinking is, burnout is a very real thing, especially you and I have had experience working for not-for-profits, and also just speaking to friends who are just putting in extra hours. They're just working crazy hours just to get the job done. What are the signs that we might be experiencing burnout? And how can we, if we have experienced it, how do we recover from burnout in the workplace?
Yeah, it's such a live issue right now, especially, 3 years into COVID, and we've experienced so much fatigue and change. The signs of burnout vary from person to person, but I think there's a few common things to look out for. And I'm certainly not a psychologist, but I've seen people burn out in the workplace. Myself, have had a pretty significant experience with burnout about 3 or 4 years ago. And the things to look out for would be lack of sleep. So when you start waking up in the middle of the night and you can't get back to sleep, that's usually can be a sign of, there's something maybe that's going on where you're not able to sleep. You're stressed, anxious, feeling that pressure. The other dynamic is the opposite end. So you're fatigued and exhausted all the time. You're needing to sleep a lot more than normal. That feeling that you get on the drive to work, and I'm not talking about another day, it's Monday, like not just talking about like your general like Monday vibes of, oh gee, I wish I was on a holiday. We all kind of go through those moments, but I'm talking about the drive to work where you start to feel either sick, you might be feeling sick, you might be feeling like you can't eat, or just that level of kind of anxiety. Might be quite emotional, very teary. The other things that I've seen is you either undereat or overeat. So any of those types of physical reactions, it's really important to pay attention to those, because one of the things that happens in burnout, and I learned this by, through a lot of therapy and support, is it's your body's way of telling you there's a problem. And often our minds are, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And we keep pushing through, but our body starts to go, hey, Shelley, like, hey, Sarah, slow down. This is not working. And that's why we often have a physical response. So it's really being attentive to your body. What is it telling you? And listening. And the other thing is often we need to listen to those trusted voices around us. So for me, my husband, Sam, he is always much more aware of if I'm, and back when I was going through this journey myself, of he was kind of waving the red flag, but I wasn't really listening, because I had this sense of, no, I'm really capable. Like I'm really like, I can do it all. And the truth is, what I realized is I couldn't do it all. And so the toll of buying into that lie and the cost for me personally and for my family was massive. And so it's coming to that realization and going, well, my learning through my journey, Sarah, was I can't do it all, but I can choose what I'm going to do. So I need to choose wisely. And I'm not going to choose things that come at the expense of my health and my family. So that became part of the recovery process of just having to unpack what are the lies that I've told myself, and then how do I need to change my behavior in order to really recover. So allow that time and a space for recovery, but also make sure that I didn't fall into that trap again, because it tends to be people who are perfectionists or workaholics. If you've got any of those tendencies, it's really starting to do the internal work to go, what is it in me that's causing this? What are the lies, or where is my identity kind of connected to my job in an unhealthy way? And therefore, how can I start to unwind some of that stuff?
Yeah, that's really insightful too. And I was even just thinking about a lot of companies do offer that EAP program as well. And I have to admit, sometimes I've been like, I don't want to use the EAP because I don't want to admit that I've got like something to work through, but I just would highly encourage people to consider using that, because first of all, it's free. Usually they offer free services. And secondly, there's nothing wrong with talking to someone and getting some help. So that's just my little...
Totally. And are you okay? Last year, their campaign was for Are You Okay Day was, are you really okay? And I love that question. It's not like this, hey, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine, which is what we usually respond to that question. But actually coming back, and it might be asking yourself this question, am I really okay? Like really, if I'm really truthful, am I okay? But also taking the responsibility to ask that of other people. So the people in your world who you're watching and you think, oh, I don't know if everything's all right there. I've asked them, are you okay? And they said, no, I'm fine. But I'm just going to go back and follow up and say, hey, Sarah, I know you said you're fine, but are you really okay? Because that's when we start to unlock the conversation and allow the space for someone to unpack where they're at and share their story.
Yeah, that's really good, Shell. Such a great reminder. Now we're pretty much out of time, which I'm so sad because I could keep talking about this all day with you. But as we wrap up, is there any last remarks or thoughts that you'd love to share with those that are listening or watching?
Yeah, I think for me, there's so many things like practically we can be doing in our career, and there's so many, ways we can progress, and that's all really important. But my final encouragement would be that who you are and who you're becoming is far more important than what you do. And so having a great career is awesome. Like, who doesn't want to have a good career? But your career, I think, is always secondary to who you're becoming as a person. And so really thinking through that and going, my identity is not caught up in my career. It matters, it's important, but it's not everything. So that'd be my final kind of encouragement to your listeners, Sarah.
So good. Thank you so much, Shell, just for your insight and for sharing from your experience. I know this is going to speak to a lot of women. So thank you so much for joining us today.
No worries. Thanks so much for having me.
And to everyone else, thank you so much for joining us by listening or watching. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to this channel where you'll continue to hear more inspiring and empowering content. Until next time, see you then. Bye.
See ya.